Morning. Excellent. Benjamin, Peter, and the Karate Labs team join me in thanking you for being here, Benjamin. I think it's great. We have interacted a fair bit, and it's great to finally have you here. We have had an overwhelming response on this exciting topic. So if I may just take the first 2-3 minutes to set the context, introduce you to begin with. After being a game and application developer and trainer for 15 years, Benjamin decided in 2017 to make test automation his main career. Currently, he works as a test automation engineer in trivago's core QA team. His focus lies on the development and maintenance of trivago's in-house end-to-end test framework and related build pipelines, as well as back-end automation. Additionally, he provides help with all test automation matters. Benjamin is the author and maintainer of 2 open source projects for Cucumber, BDD parallel test execution, and reporting. Also, he is a conference speaker and writes about testing and automation topics on his blog, softwaretester.blog. Benjamin, thank you once again. Tell us about your journey, what brought you to the world of development, your experience with test automation, and the tipping point in 2017 where you decided to make test automation your main career.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'll try to make it short because it's quite a long story. I decided in school that I would be a software developer because some of my classmates started programming in BASIC. So I picked this up as well and went along for this journey. Later did a vocational training in Germany for 2.5 years to become a software engineer. I never studied at a university. That may be important to know and surprising. And after 2 years of work, I was a freelancer for 6 years, doing mainly game development and web development. And then I was hired full-time by a well-known games company, first as a front-end lead for a Facebook game. And after 2 years, when this project was canceled, I went into a tools and services team doing Java enterprise development. And during that time, I came in contact with testing, unit testing and integration testing, also how to interact with QA teams all across the world, and also Selenium. And that was like the tipping point, seeing the browser automatically do what I wanted it to do to test our web tools and services. That was so fascinating to me that I wanted to go that route further. And because there was no way to proceed in that direction at this company, I decided to join trivago as a test automation engineer and have been here with a short pause in between for 7 years. So yeah, this work in the tools and services team that basically shaped my decision to go into testing.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks for that, Benjamin. And one, maybe I can't call it a secret, but one certainly well-known fact, and maybe for the large audience we have here to highlight, is that you've been a magician for 36 years, right?
Yeah, much longer than a developer.
Your career. And Peter and I have read some of your fascinating blogs on your blog site, where you have taken the link of magic principles in test automation like clarity, framing, and time lapse. Yeah. So let me make an amateurish attempt to bring magic to the topic today, which is API versus UI testing. So first, in magic, the magician shows you something relatively ordinary, like a dove. And then the magician takes the dove and makes it do something extraordinary, like disappear. And then comes that moment of prestige where the magician tops that disappearance and makes the dove disappear, or rather reappear after disappearance. So in all this, what the magician shows could be equated to possibly UI. But what is not seen is the sleight of hand, which is the API. So which is more important? Is it API or UI testing for a magical end user experience?
Oh, wow. That is That is such a great question. Certainly in Magic, both sides are equally important. Magic is the only art form where you try to hide your skills. And if you are a musician or a painter, you want to show your skills to the audience, but a magician does not want to see the real skill, the sleight of hand. For the audience, it's more important what they see, but for the magician, it may be more important at what they don't see. So depending on the site, it's hard to answer. I think it's both equally important. As magicians, we spend way more time on the API side, I would say.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. And Magic and test automation is a great way to start this off. And speaking of what you see and what you don't see, which is in the back end, Benjamin, and this is just an opinion I'm sharing, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, right? I feel in the world of testing and even software, right, people see the user interface. It's something you can touch and feel. And it's very natural that people, focus only on the user interface when it comes to even doing things like testing, right? And by the way, I also started out seeing Selenium in the 2000s. I won't say the exact year, but I think it was Ruby and Water, and it was very magical when the browser came to life and just ran on its own. But do you think, Benjamin, that API testing or backend testing doesn't get enough attention because people just talk about the UI all the time? Is that something you feel?
Yes, I strongly feel that. Like if you look on LinkedIn about posts about test automation, I would say 85% of the time talk about browser testing, which is just a small part of test automation. But it's this part that everybody can instantly understand what is happening. Like a user interacts with the website, so automation does the same thing. The API side, you have to know more about the backend side of things. You have to dig deeper to really understand what's going on. But once you understand that, I think it's equally fascinating.
And yes, I agree. And since I've spent a lot of time writing tooling around APIs, I feel APIs are not talked about enough. That's certainly my kind of biased view, if you were to say that. And speaking of easy to see and all that, and you talked about, Benjamin, that there is kind of a learning curve for APIs. Yeah, you may need to know some lower level things, right? But if I ask you the question, which would you think is simpler? And maybe another question is, which would you want to be doing more of the time? Maybe just as you personally, right? Which would you enjoy doing more? What do you think about that?
Wow, you're asking some really tough questions. If I had to choose, I would probably choose the API side now, because it is faster. It is faster to see results. You don't consume that much resources. You can write API tests much more quickly. Once you understand the importance of the API and what impact it has on the front end, you realize that it's just a lot of overhead to test those things through the front end. And seeing API tests execute in fractions of seconds is just such a relief after seeing UI tests that take minutes.
Oh man, I mean, tell me about it. And I just realized recently, I have to say this because I was trying to sell API testing honestly to another team recently, and I said, you know what, API testing is the only kind of testing I know of where, okay, besides unit testing, but the E2E kind of testing in that world, is the only kind of testing where you can run an API test suite and then continue to do work on your computer. You can write a Word document, check your email and stuff like that, which I don't think you can do really well with UI automation unless you try very hard. And for the benefit of the audience, I know that Benjamin and I don't agree on something, so let's see if we can surface these things and make this exciting. And let me think. What kind of controversial thing? Let's start off, Benjamin, by how hard is it, right? I just want to deep dive there. You talked about UI tests being complex. There's a whole lot of things you need to worry about, and they are slow, and API tests are kind of a breeze to at least run, once you've got them written.
Yeah.
What do you think? What's your opinion, Benjamin, of how easy is it to write API tests from scratch? Is there a lot of things you need to learn? Is there more that you need to know? Yes.
You certainly need to know how APIs work. You need to know, depending on the API, of course, you need to know JSON or XML or GraphQL or things like this. Once you know those things, which are honestly not that hard to grasp, I think it's rather easy to start writing API tests. With UI tests, I think the learning curve is steeper because you should know about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, web servers, also like the API level or what the website actually communicates with, databases. There's just a whole world below the surface of the UI. If you want to only test the UI and the functionality of the UI, I think it's rather easy, or it can be easy. But once you want to dig deeper with your end-to-end tests through the UI, it gets harder and harder. And also it gets harder and harder to make those tests reliable and not flaky.
Okay. In fact, I kind of agree with everything you're saying, Benjamin.
Oh no, we have to find something.
Let me add some controversy. I know, and by the way, I saw one of the jokes you made on LinkedIn recently. It was like something related to the page object model, right? The great POM, as I think a lot of the folks in the audience would know what a page object model is. I'll be straight up honest about this, Benjamin. I'm not a big fan of the page object model. I personally think it has led to a lot of over-engineering. I also think, and this is somewhat controversial, so let's be controversial. At least I'm going to be controversial. I think test automation is probably a place you shouldn't be spending time applying design patterns. I would go so far to say as maybe code reuse is not really something that helps with test automation, because I personally don't like going to different files when I'm trying to understand what a test does. And I think the page object model does that. Over to you, Benjamin.
Oh yes, you found something that I heavily disagree with. I like the page object model. I like the page component model even more, because if you wrap a whole page into a class, you have something like a God class that can do everything with that page, and that gets really confusing. So what I like to do is create different components of a page and wrap that inside of a page object model. By the way, I always, when someone talks about POM, I always confuse it with the Maven pom.xml. So I have to take a further step to think about what this is, what they mean. I like, and I would actually recommend spending time with the design patterns and code craftsmanship and clean code principles. It might be a remains of my full-time development career for 15 years, where I learned those things, and it changed my my style of coding drastically. It heavily depends on what you use, on the solution you use for testing. If you look at something like a custom framework, Selenium-based framework, I think it makes a lot of sense to apply those design patterns, at least in the framework itself. Not necessarily in the tests, but if you look at something like karate, I don't think there is much room to apply those things in the test scenarios, because yeah, everything is there in the scenarios already. So depending on the technology you use, I heavily disagree with you.
Okay.
And I agree with you as far as karate is concerned.
Okay, so yeah, and if I rephrase what you're saying the choice of a framework or whether a framework exists and to what extent it exists. Yes, I agree that if you have a framework that's not maybe well fleshed out in some areas, you need to add more code, frameworky-ish code, and maybe page object model helpers and all that, which is, yeah, I agree with that.
Since we're talking frameworks,
yeah.
What led you to karate? How did you find? How long have you been using karate? What do you like? What do you don't like? Your thoughts?
Well, the thing actually started when, after years of doing UI tests, and then there was, I don't remember the exact occasion, but there was the requirement to do some API testing suddenly. And then a colleague said, there is this new framework that's called Karate. Maybe we can use that. And we did an evaluation of different frameworks, like doing everything from scratch in pure Java, using Rest Assured and using Karate. And it was so much easier and more straightforward to do it in Karate that we went for it. But honestly, I didn't like it at first because it packed everything into one framework. All the different kinds of testing, like API testing, UI testing, performance tests, everything in one. And it makes Java my favorite language, or as I always say, the language I hate the least, and JavaScript, the language I probably hate the most. So it mixed those languages, it mixed those test approaches. So I was not a big fan, and I was probably the only one who voted for the Rest Assured way. But after working with it for a while, after writing tests and seeing how quickly unexperienced testers could grasp the idea how to write those tests, I completely changed my mind. And right now, actually, I'm also evaluating the Karate UI testing capabilities to see how far we can push this, if we can replace parts of test approach with Karate in the future. So yeah, from just using it, I changed my mind.
Oh, wonderful. Our compliments to you, because human beings can be very fixed in their views, irrespective of what evidence they get. And I always compliment the ones who are willing to hold two differing opinions and then evolve. So thank you so much for that. In fact, building on that, because we are talking about frameworks and tools, there are two very interesting questions actually. One is, it's anonymous, so I can't name the person, but industry recommends that UI automation should be simple and one should not automate at all. Does that apply for API tests as well? Both of you, either of you?
Okay, I'll take. It's a great question, because I know there's a lot of advice in the test automation community saying, don't automate everything, think before you automate, step back, ask why, and all that, which, if you again, maybe we'll disagree on this, Benjamin. I think personally that sometimes you have to automate something, and I personally feel APIs are the best place that you should start. So I would go so far as to say, and this comes from at least my experience, which is if you had to choose, right, if you have limited number of hours in a day and you had to choose between API and UI testing, I would choose APIs because they are a little more foundational. APIs tend to, stick around for a long time. UI frameworks come and go. You will be invariably rewriting, and I'm being sarcastic here a little bit, you're going to be invariably rewriting your front end in React and whatever comes after React and Angular and goodness knows what, right? This is kind of a little bit of a problem in the JavaScript space, to be honest. APIs most likely will last for 5 to 10 years. So, invest time in that. And as Benjamin said, right, it's probably going to be easier to automate, rerun, run in parallel. They're stable. They're not going to be flaky and all that. Should you automate every API scenario that you think of? Probably not. I agree completely with that, right? I have seen, again, the bad side of API tests, because API tests are just like any kind of code, right? You can over-engineer and write all kinds of horrible tests that probably do more harm than good. They are just wasting time. And if you probably analyze all your tests today, even in UI testing, they probably are all going through the same page multiple times, which is bad. You should try to avoid that. So I know I give you very generic advice, but let's see, Benjamin, you wanted to add anything, or what do you think?
Never automate everything or attempt automating everything. It does not work. Even if you want to, and if have unlimited time, it does not work, because you will you will hit a lot of walls doing that. It doesn't matter if you try it with UI tests or API tests. For API tests, I think this goal would be reachable, probably, but for UI, you just can't, unless you have a very, very, very simple website.
Yeah.
Where you just fill out one text field and press send, and that's it. Other than that, I don't think you can. And yeah, for UI, you would spend so much money on resources alone if you tried to run everything. So I disagree with the don't think before you automate. I'm also being sarcastic. You have to ask why you want to automate at all, if it's even necessary. And the more important question is, where should you automate? Like, if you want to verify some data, you can do it on the API. You could also do it on the UI side. Let's say you have a web shop and you enter a search term and you get a list of products. You can do that on the UI side, but it's probably much, much more straightforward and quicker if you do it on the API side. But that comes back to, if you like a certain technology, a certain approach, you tend to automate in this approach, which we have done. And I'm also guilty of that, like doing data verification through the UI.
Oh, yes. And this is great. And I just noted, the other place probably where we are disagreeing is that, yeah, I'm a little bit of trigger happy. I sound definitely controversial that, yeah, I'd say I'm kind of I'm giving off the vibe here that you should just go into a project and start automating APIs, without thinking too much. And in my defense, let me say that, I do believe a lot in being agile. And I think that because of the nature of API tests, you can actually experiment, explore, and then learn something and then figure out what actual test to run. And I just want to make a point that I don't like some of the advice on the internet cautioning teams to, think, because, I think that gets you into analysis paralysis and you end up wasting time. I think personally a better approach is try to automate something, and then while doing that, you will learn a lot of things. Like you learn how to use the framework, learn about your application, maybe explore a little bit, and so on. So that's good. I wanted to deep dive into a point, Benjamin, you just made, which is setting up, trying to use the UI to enter data is definitely hard. I wouldn't advise it. I would always look for an API or go direct to the database in those situations. What do you think about assertions, Benjamin? If I tell you, how do you assert data in a UI and API? Do you see any differences, or which would you choose again?
Now I would definitely choose API. You send something to the API, you get data back, and it's very, very easy to do assertions and matches. If you do it through the AI, you have to work with locators, you have to enter something into some text field, then you have to scrape the results.
Yes.
And it does the same thing in a way, but much more complex. But I also have to say, in its defense, you can only know that your website functions if you test it through the UI. I mean, if a website relies on 10 APIs and one of them doesn't work correctly, it might also be that the website still is usable. So it's a tough call to make. But in terms of data verification, I would always go for APIs first.
Awesome. And I, of course, agree. And that was the answer I was looking for, to be very honest with you. But I want to deep dive, and this is a good learning for me. What you just said, that if something in your user interface does not work, it's actually a critical blocker for your business, and which is the reason why you should have some level of UI tests. Whether it is automated is one question. Definitely helps, for all the regression purposes and all that. But I grant you that, because what you kind of reminded me, Benjamin, is that I'm this person who's like very obsessed with API tests in some ways, right? Clearly, I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I do probably fall into the trap of saying, yeah, everything should be API tests. We don't need UI tests. But I think what you just said is a good reminder, and I appreciate that. And I see, yeah, there's a question on in-sprint automation. So thanks, Vineet, for asking that. Let's get your thoughts on that. I see it in the chat. So have you ever seen, Benjamin, any team achieve in-sprint, and I'm using double air quotes here, right? In-sprint automation?
In-sprint API automation, yes. In-sprint UI automation, no. I have seen teams, and there are teams now that modify existing UI tests to fit their new feature set, or if they change a feature, that those tests are running, which is great. But writing new UI tests for every feature that gets pushed, it's just too much. Whereas doing that for APIs, that works. And I've seen that happening, but not 100%. I mean, it's also a matter of discipline.
No, great. And which reminds me, what about flaky tests, Benjamin? I refer occasionally to flaky tests as like the big F word of the test automation industry, flaky. Have you seen, again, I'll tell you my experience, right? I've seen many UI automation initiatives, teams doing UI automation. Over time, the UI tests are read because everyone has given up. Yeah, that test sometimes fails. Okay, it's read, but still the application is okay. Let's just push it to production, right? Teams get into this, and then you know what happens. Nobody cares about automation or hygiene anymore. Is this something you see often? Have you seen teams that successfully manage this? What do you give as advice?
I have seen my team successfully managing this, which is great, because we spend time every day, every morning, to review test runs that we do through the night. So we have overnight test runs to detect flaky tests. And every morning, everybody sees what was flaky, and sometimes it points to real issues, which is always nice. I mean, not for the business, but for me to see that automation actually catches stuff. And sometimes it leads to tests being questioned or put into quarantine or being reworked. This is constantly happening for us. I know this is not happening in all the companies, all the teams, but for us, this works.
No, that's great. That's Fantastic advice.
But if I may, I have a question for you, Peter.
Sure.
That I was really asking myself, especially today when playing around with Karate UI. If you are so focused on API testing, why did you even implement UI tests into Karate?
A great question. Short answer is I started out by studying the WebDriver specification or the Selenium protocol. And when I looked at it, I said, aha, this is just a bunch of REST endpoints. And it is, you know what I mean, right? It's just, and then I said, you know what is Karate good at? Karate is great at making API calls. So let me try and combine a couple of things. And it worked really well. My first attempt was, yeah, I got that magical moment back where I saw the browser, driven by Karate through an API test. And then it led from there, Benjamin. So there's no, it was also a personal challenge, to be honest, that I also felt that API testing was more or less there. And, and yes, as you noted, right, Karate, and it's partly driven by what I think, which I feel a test automation framework should be having multiple capabilities, right? It should be, in my opinion, and this is again debatable, and I know we may be on different sides on this, but I do feel that I was thinking, wouldn't it be cool to have both API and UI test automation in one framework? And that's honestly how it started. And then one thing led to another. Yeah.
In fact, building on that question, Peter, Abhishek has asked a fantastic question, and it'll be good for you to provide your input, and I can add on, is the fact that we have done this year a lot of improvement on API side with Karate. He's a big supporter of Karate. How stable is our UI framework, and what is our plan for the UI side? So
that's a great one. I'll quickly answer that. And thanks, Abhishek. I know you from a long time on Twitter and LinkedIn, so thank you for your continued support. And the first answer is the UI automation of Karate is actually being used by a lot of enterprises. I won't name names here, but I think you've seen that in some of our webinars, hopefully. So it is very stable. And I think the problem is keep in mind that Karate Labs has kind of, I left my day job, started Karate Labs along with Kapil, my good friend, almost 1.5 years back. And we have started the whole awareness. We still need to do more. And honestly, what has been happening before then is, although I was working on the UI side and getting a fair amount of contributions, I don't think I did a great job marketing it. So people are not aware is what I've been, actually shocked, because you know how it is with me. I feel, okay, I posted it on LinkedIn. I think the whole world knows now I don't need to do anything more. And it's completely wrong. There's lots more need to be done. But let me give you some confidence that there are folks now contributing regularly to the UI automation. In fact, we got visual testing added to Karate recently, which is completely an external contribution. So go and check that out if you haven't. And we hope to continue the momentum, going forward. I hope that helps.
Yes, you might want to just add on how companies in the healthcare sector are using Karate for desktop automation with Karate Robot, and how they're also starting to contribute more.
Yes, and desktop automation again was a similar experiment I needed to do. In fact, the trigger for that was because my previous corporate job had a desktop application that needed to be tested. So for those of you who don't know, this might be a huge surprise and a shock. Karate technically can do Windows desktop automation. So look out for that. There are big names using it. So yeah, check that out. But sorry, I don't want to make this about a Karate thing. Benjamin, anything else you think I missed in terms of controversial UI topics, or is there something you remember that you don't agree with me on? Shoot.
Controversial UI topics. Interesting. Well, I noticed in the course of our conversations before this webinar that we actually agree on many things, which was really surprising after seeing your tweets sometimes.
Yeah, that's hard. It's what do I say? Twitter and LinkedIn can be actually very damaging. And Kapil is nowadays, he's got the role of a coach for me, and he tells me sometimes, okay, Peter, don't tweet, calm down. And Benjamin, you're right. I do get triggered and I get very passionate about some topics in test automation. And it's sometimes, not been great. I've made enemies. For example, Benjamin, one of the statements I made somewhere is, I think you're worrying more about your test automation report than doing your actual test. And I'm apologies. By the way, I know, Benjamin, you make one of the best reporting frameworks. That's your open source Cucumber. So
Thank you.
do not take nothing, no disrespect meant. But honestly, right, I've seen teams that just worry about, hey, color, my boss, my management, my leadership needs to see this pie chart. If not, it's not a good framework. And I personally get very upset by that. So yeah.
I remember your article with the Selenium alternative, which probably went viral in the testing world, where you talked about that you built an alternative. Yeah, I was pretty much disagreeing with the whole thing.
Oh, okay. So great. And I hope you would forget some of that and hopefully contribute to karate. In fact, I meant to say this earlier, which is, what do you say? You said that you are exploring karate for UI testing. I know you're kind of still starting out, and obviously there are a lot of things you won't like, I'm sure, because of all the reasons that we talked about. But please, it'd be great if you can contribute to karate and make it better. Who knows, maybe we do need a page object model and there is space for it in karate UI, and maybe you're the one who could contribute. So yeah, please keep it in mind.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of starting to contribute to karate.
I think that'll be great. Yeah, go ahead. You were saying something, Benjamin.
Yeah, I was thinking there was one thing, I don't remember what it was, but something you refused to integrate into karate, and there are instances where you had big discussions on GitHub with certain issues and requests, and this is always very interesting to read, I think.
Is it perhaps Benjamin, the cucumber keyword stuff that is it that?
Yeah, that could be it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think the good thing about karate is, and I can give you an outside-in perspective now that I'm part of this wonderful journey for the last year and a half, is the tagline which says it all: test automation made simple. So I think a large part of the pushback and now more embracing is, do we deviate from the core origin of karate, which is write tests faster, write better tests, and enable collaboration across wider teams, which is non-programmers and programmers. And I think as long as any contribution or any pull request comes which sticks to that true origin and even challenges some of our biases, I think is absolutely good, absolutely good. And I always tell Peter, there's a balance. You were working with the Fortune 100 company and trying to grow a project as a maintainer, sole maintainer with contributors. But now we are a company and our whole responsibility goes to a completely new level. We are backed by Y Combinator, uncorrelated ventures, but our full focus is the end user. And that's something we have made even crystal clear to the ecosystem.
Yeah, I know that from being a maintainer of a, in comparison, very small project. You mentioned Cucumber, myself, that you constantly defend your vision of the project. If some feature requests come in that you don't agree with, it's really challenging to find a good communication and to also have the courage to say no. This is not what this is supposed to do. So yeah.
Oh, and yeah, that touched a nerve in me, because you're absolutely right. And Benjamin, it's very hard to say no. It takes a lot of strength to kind of politely tell someone it's a good idea. It's not really my priority. And if I listen to everyone, I don't think karate would be the shape it is. I think that's a very important point. And I really want to say that also for the benefit of others who probably want to contribute to open source. It's very important, right? And you will end up being a villain, and there'll be people who hate you because you said something rude to them and, Stack Overflow. I think it's kind of an occupational hazard. So I move on. I can't look back. I just have to move on. Speaking of Cucumber, I have this question, and one of the things karate does very differently from Cucumber is, you can call other feature files, and I know we had a discussion on that, because Cucumber by default is a flat report. You can't nest, steps. The question I have for you, Benjamin, is that I have a point of view that API test automation is much more readable if you stick it into an HTML report. And maybe UI automation is not that readable. I keep saying that the HTML report that you get after running an API test is far more usable as a spec or a readable living specification than the equivalent UI automation test, because the UI automation test has to do clicks and scrolling. And yeah, I know I'm exaggerating, but what do you think?
I think it depends on the layer that is in front of it. I mean, for our in-house test framework, we use Cucumber as a layer on top of the UI tests. So it is very readable, even for people who don't know about how the web application actually looks like, because we try to formulate the test steps in a way that they make sense, also for people who are non-technical. Whereas you took this this gherkin format, and its goal is to be readable and to be understandable by everyone in the context of behavior-driven development, and you put technical stuff inside of it. And that was another thing I really disliked about karate at first, but it makes it very straightforward and very easy to write those tests without leaving this feature file. But on the flip side, it makes it sometimes way harder to read in the test report than a well-written UI test that uses Gherkin, because if you use JSON path and those fancy karate shortcuts in your steps, it can get super complex to understand, even for technical people.
Oh, that's brilliant. This is a great discussion. I just love this. You're absolutely right. I have seen horribly written karate tests. I've seen karate tests that call multiple other features, which upsets me, because karate was designed so that you have everything in one flow, and then people break that, and it'll happen all the time. But going back to your point, I agree with you actually that, but there's an if here, right? If you put enough effort into maintaining that layer of Cucumber that reads like natural English, and of course, a business analyst would love reading a proper, well-written Cucumber script, right? It just talks business terms, and yeah, it's almost like a use case, user story, or whatever. And yes, no doubt about that. Karate can never compete with that. And I kind of, from day one, I've tried to make it clear, but a lot of people still think, unfortunately, that karate is like Cucumber. It's not. And you made me think, in fact, one of the notes I have made to self, Benjamin, based on what you said earlier, is that, your first reaction to karate was understandably not positive, because it was this weird mix of HTTP keywords and JavaScript and all that. But it kind of works, and it takes time to get used. I grant that. And it's a note to me that I need to be very careful about this when trying to, convince people to look at karate. But the point I want to make on API tests is that, because the domain of HTTP is so simple, right? You just need what's the URL, what's the headers, and what's the method. You're done with the whole business of setting up a test at least, and then you wait for the response, right? So I think I'm just thinking out aloud here also, that I think that's why karate works as this, weird cucumber-like approach. Yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts based on that? But this is great.
This just triggered the thing I mentioned before about the feature you refused.
Please.
Yeah, which was custom steps.
Custom steps.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. For those who care, there is a big thread on GitHub. I have some reasons, and it's controversial. I know that I found many people who want the flexibility of writing plain English in karate files, and I have defended that. And of course, by the way, there is still hope, Benjamin. I have changed my mind in few things when I get data. But what I have done, Benjamin, I've asked people, okay, give me an example of a test that is in this form, and then let's talk. I haven't had many good examples come forward. But yeah, thanks for reminding me of that. The official answer from the karate point of view is that because karate allows you to write JavaScript and plug in Java code, obviously, which is one of the big selling points. And because you can plug in Java code, you don't need to, have any special support like Cucumber step definitions. You can just integrate and get on with your work. So that's one way of me explaining how I think about that. Which reminds me, Benjamin, in the world of APIs, and you talked about GraphQL, REST, and there are new things coming. I just wanted to bounce off you, and I don't have a, I'm just interested in your point of view. Beyond HTTP, there are things like Kafka, gRPC, and all that. Do you consider that API testing, first of all? And what advice do you have for teams who are thinking of doing that kind of testing?
From the top of my head, I would say yes, because it interacts with data in the backend. I also consider databases kind of API tests, because
Great
you
point.
have data providers, and you ask for data and you get data, and you send requests back and forth. I would certainly not start with those topics when working with karate or any other framework. I would first explore the framework itself with simpler APIs, maybe JSON-based or JSON-based REST APIs or XML, and then learn more about those topics like Kafka streams on the side, because you really need to have an understanding of what this is before trying to automate it. Whereas REST APIs, I think they're so straightforward to understand, with a few verbs and what you can do. You send something and you get something back. That's not real rocket science, I would say.
Let me, Peter, I'm just conscious of time, and there are some wonderful questions. Do you have any comment, or can I do a rapid round?
Yeah, I think yes. Questions, go ahead.
So go, because there are some fantastic comments, questions, and let's do a rapid round. And then I want to unmute some of the participants to also ask live if they would like to. So one, if you're doing data testing, can we say that API testing is enough? Should we not be concerned whether this data is displaying properly on the UI? This is asked by Kareem Dogan. Quick answer.
I'll go first. Data testing. Yes, I think we touched on that. I will stick to my earlier point, which is, if you had to choose, right? And teams, that we don't have all the time in the world to ship, and there's always pressure to ship more things. So if you were to start with automation, start with API testing, I'm going to stick to that rule of thumb. But yes, someone needs to test whether your user can actually interact with your user interface. I think there's no question. There's no debate on that. What do you think, Benjamin?
The same. We have business critical test scenarios through the UI that we run constantly as monitoring. So then we are really sure the application is not usable for end users. But as I would first go for API and then test the real critical money-making stuff also through the UI.
Excellent. Thank you. One question, and Abhishek, thank you so much for giving your response. Is it a good idea to combine UI tests with API? For example, perform UI tests and verifying results on front-end web, which is with API responses?
Yes, it is.
There you go.
I would,
totally.
There
yeah, I
you go.
would say yes. I mean, we're doing that with our in-house framework too. We
Okay.
call web services in our UI tests to verify some data transfer. But that was a huge hassle to add that. So yeah,
Okay,
but if you need it, you should.
excellent.
And I'll just add one. I think it's a very common use case, so I really wanted to call that out, which is I've seen teams be able to save 5 seconds per test by making an authentication call, the single sign-on to an API, get something, drop a cookie on the page, and then bam, you're in the dashboard. And you save a lot of time per test, which really adds up. So yes, API and UI hybrid tests, totally recommended.
Excellent. I've just launched a poll while I continue with the question. So, Benjamin, you made a statement saying when you got first introduced to karate and you were the one who voted out of karate, but now you have come to embrace it. What advice would you give the viewers that if they have to get started with karate, what to watch out for so that they don't get repulsed by it and embrace it the way you have?
Pick the easiest API, pick a low-hanging fruit first, and do a simple test and see how you like it. I wouldn't take a very complex test case and try to cram it into karate without knowing the basics. Karate has a great documentation, I have to say, even if not enough people read it. But read the documentation and start small is my advice.
Excellent. Somebody's asked a question. Okay, I'll rephrase it actually. I'll bundle 2 questions into one. Is there a playbook you would want to define for the audience? Basically summarizing the last 54 minutes on what you should do what should comprise of an API test straight away and what should be a UI test? Is there a playbook or a cheat sheet that you would want to prescribe here?
Man, that's a very good question. I wish I had such simple answers. I wish life would be so simple. So I think the short answer is depends. You know, you've heard that too many times, but let me try and give some actionable advice. As Joe Colantoni always says, which is, if you have APIs, you're going to find someone in your team who has got a list of all the APIs, right? You'll have this list of endpoints and then methods, which are all the operations that you can automate using an API testing tool. So I would start there, and chances are, again, if you're pressed for time, that if you cover that list, and we're kind of talking about API functional coverage in a sense, you would get somewhere very fast. You'll have at least a basic level of confidence that if you have this test suite green, you can ship to production with most likelihood of things going well. So, and of course, I would try. I will take back one of my earlier statements that, you should think a little bit when you start testing, which are the most commonly used APIs. I think someone in your team would be able to tell you that. Typically, you may get that data from your Splunk or, observability and logging and all that. So I would start there. That's my personal playbook. I don't know, Benjamin, if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, what a great question.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking about how to write such a playbook. Yeah, if you have critical APIs, test those first. If you have critical user flows in the UI, test those as well. My advice would be don't test too much. Also, don't repeat the same things over and over again in your tests. It doesn't matter if API or UI, and just focus on a smaller test suite that tests the critical stuff and not on a large test suite that tries to test everything.
Excellent. Make sure that you co-author that playbook with us.
Yes.
Yeah, please. I'm
That's a
just kidding.
cool challenge.
No, I think it's an interesting one because this is a fantastic topic. It's amazing that we converged on this topic. You know, the kind of response we got even with the registration. So I think something like this as a deliverable, being an open source company and releasing it out there, and opening it up for debate and versioning it and updating it, I think would be great, Benjamin. We'll take it up offline with you. Any more questions?
Sure.
Let me see. The poll is doing well. It's almost done. We still have around 20 more people to do the poll. We still have three more minutes. Benjamin, parting advice from you to us. What, if you were in our place, Karate Labs, what advice would you give us going forward? Because we are scaling not a solution anymore, a company very responsibly. We are answerable only to our users and our enterprise users. We remain open source. We are not driven by greed. We are at a different stage in our life. So please, what advice do you have for us, Benjamin?
Wow. I don't know if I'm in the right position to give you business advice.
Anything.
What I think is something you can maybe work on is promotion, and doing promotion that shows the power of the framework more. I like that you shared stuff on Twitter in small videos, but I would love to see that in a larger scale, like as a series of webinars or like a course. Even I don't mean certifications, but just a step-by-step guide of how to automate a simple REST API, and maybe throw in some UI automation, and just to raise awareness what this framework can actually do. Because I'm not sure this is clear to everyone.
Yeah. And you are absolutely right. Peter and I have, we have work to do in that area is all we would say. We are trying to make it simpler. We are trying to take the comprehensive documentation and break it into bite-sized chunks with live scenarios, some powerful features from a point of a beginner, intermediate level user, and an expert user of karate. Everybody wants to know, right? So that is work in progress, but your advice is absolutely well taken. And I think is one of the things that keeps us up at night. One of the main things. One of the main things that keeps us up at night. Abhishek, great question. Do we have any plan to build an official community on platforms like Discord? We have again deliberated on that. We have a growing community on Slack, Abhishek. If you're not part of it, by all means, please reach out to us at info@karatelabs.io and we will do the rest. We can only handle that many channels. So right now we are on Slack. Maybe at some point in time, we'll introduce Discord, but that's the answer. Anything else? Peter, any parting comments from your side?
No, that's great. I mean, this is a fantastic discussion. It's given me a lot of food for thought, and it's kind of forced me to reflect on a few things I've done in the past and some of the decisions we've made. And I look forward to collaborating with you, hopefully more, Benjamin. I know you already contribute, and Cucumber has very good support for karate, so thank you for that. And really hope to keep the conversation going on and have you back. Will be great.
And tell Benjamin, your ecosystem, please. We are open to more contribution, ideas. Yes, it'll be vetted. There has to be emotion out of it. There has to be logic in it. And we'll absolutely embrace it, Benjamin.
That's very cool. Yeah, I also enjoyed all the conversations we had so far, and that led me to, I would even say, a deeper admiration of what this product you're building actually contains and how much thought went into it. And I always wonder, where do you get the time to do this all? Because it doesn't seem like you're just one Peter. It seems like you have an army of Peters, also one Peter on Stack Overflow, and one developing the framework, one writing the documentation. So that is really cool to see.
Well, thank you. We have a lot of support and a lot of users, and I think connecting with the users, I find Stack Overflow quite useful. So, I keep that going as far as possible. But thank you for your kind words, Benjamin. Really appreciate it.
No, excellent. Thank you so much, Benjamin. It's been an absolute pleasure. We will certainly continue our offline interactions and look forward to that continued association with you. And to all our attendees, thank you so much for taking your time and giving us your time and being here. Absolute great to have you all. The recording will be made available in due course. And by all means, keep sharing, keep learning. And we look forward to your continued support to Karate. Benjamin, vielen Dank. Auf Wiedersehen.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Peter.
Goodbye.
Thanks for being here with us. Thank you, everybody.